The thumping beat of an unspoken vow echoed in her mind. Asterisk, she was taking shots at the enemy. She was going to make it to the top. Leave a legacy. If she had something to say, they better let her speak. Asterisk, before her mother died, she had arranged Elena's marriage to the heir of the Sterling family, the most powerful dynasty on the Upper East Side. Elena was only 10 when she passed away. As soon as she was gone, her father immediately remarried his mistress, took the estate her grandfather had left for her, and dumped Elena in the middle of nowhere. That was 16 years ago. She hadn't heard from him since, and now he had the nerve to reach out to her. But Elena was coming back anyway, to take back what was hers and avenge her mother's death. Suddenly, the eerie quiet of the abandoned corridor was shattered by frantic shouting. Back inside. Who are you? Find Julian Sterling, a rough voice barked. The world thinks he's a philanthropist billionaire. Underneath it all, he's a ruthless crime boss. If we fail tonight, we're the ones to be buried. Deafening gunfire echoed through the halls, followed by a terrified scream. He's a damn demon. We unloaded 10 bullets into him, and he's unharmed. Please tell me, how the hell are we supposed to stop that? Before Elena could even turn, a tall, imposing figure barged into her space, violently pinning her against the wall. Moan for me aloud, or I'll slam your throat, the man hissed, his dark eyes radiating pure, unadulterated danger. Unfazed, Elena glared right back. You're insane. I don't know you. His grip tightened. Shut up and do what I say. I'll kill you. Before she could retaliate, the door was kicked open. No survivors, a thug roared, only to stop dead in his tracks at the sight of the intimately tangled couple. Hey, who are you? Get out. Elena snapped, playing the part flawlessly. The thugs grimaced. Seriously, in broad daylight? All right, keep searching. If you find him, kill him. He's a damn demon, took 10 bullets, and walked to win it all. As the heavy footsteps faded down the hall, the man slowly pulled back, his imposing demeanor shifting into a dangerously charming smirk. Thank you. And my apologies for barging in like that, he murmured. What's your name, by the way? Elena looked at the terrifying mafia boss with deadpan calm. Mary. His smirk widened. Mary. That's boring for someone so hot. Just then, men in black suits swarmed the hallway. Boss, it's clear. You can come out. Julian straightened his perfectly tailored suit, turning back to her with absolute command. You saved my life. Let me repay you. Wait for me at Grand Central tomorrow, he stated, not asking for permission. See you around, princess. As the ruthless billionaire disappeared down the hall, Elena casually slipped a heavy, cold object from her jacket pocket, a sharp, breathtaking smile forming on her lips. A 9mm Browning limited edition. You couldn't even buy one of these on the black market. I saved you and stole your gun, she thought, slipping it away. Consider your debt paid. Stepping out of the crumbling hotel and into the crisp New York air, Elena adjusted the strap of her cheap canvas bag. The weight of the stolen firearm pressed reassuringly against her waist, a cold reminder of the dangerous game she had just entered. She hailed a passing yellow cab, instructing the driver to take her to the prestigious Vance estate. As the vibrant city blurred past the window, a stark contrast to the desolate rural town she had been banished to for 16 long years, she carefully pulled her drab, oversized gray sweater tighter around her frame. She mussed her hair slightly, perfectly crafting the pathetic, impoverished look her so-called family expected to see. The taxi pulled up to the towering wrought iron gates of the Vance Manor. Elena paid the fare with crumpled bills and stepped out onto the pristine driveway. The grand structure had not changed a bit, yet it felt entirely alien, poisoned by the people who now occupied it. She walked up to the heavy oak doors, her expression an impenetrable mask of ice. A senior maid opened the door. The woman looked Elena up and down, her nose wrinkling in blatant disgust at the sight of the worn-out sneakers and faded clothing. The maid sneered, crossing her arms and demanding to know who this filthy beggar was. Elena did not utter a single word. She simply stepped forward, her chilling, authoritative presence hitting the woman like a physical blow. The mate stumbled back, her eyes widening in sudden, inexplicable fear as the supposed country bumpkin walked past her as if she owned the place. Elena navigated the familiar hallways and entered the lavish living room. Seated on the plush velvet sofa was Victoria, her stepmother, sipping tea from a porcelain cup. Her face was pulled tight with expensive cosmetic procedures, radiating an aura of fake elegance. Beside her lounged Chloe, her younger stepsister, mindlessly scrolling through her phone. Chloe was draped in luxury designer brands, every single thread paid for by the fortune stolen from the grandfather of Elena. Hearing the footsteps, Chloe looked up. Her eyes scanned the newcomer for a split second before she burst into harsh, mocking laughter. She pointed a manicured finger, loudly calling Elena a miserable, dirt-covered rat who brought the stench of the farm into their pristine home. Victoria placed her teacup down with a delicate clink, offering a venomous, condescending smile. She sighed theatrically, telling Elena she looked exactly like a tragic peasant and advising her not to touch anything lest she ruin the expensive furniture. They expected tears. They expected anger, shame, or a pitiful breakdown. Instead, Elena just stood there. She stared down at them, her beautiful eyes dark, bottomless, and utterly devoid of fear. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, wrapping around the room until Chloe began to squirm uncomfortably under the intense, predatory gaze. The arrogant stepsister opened her mouth to shout another insult, but the words died in her throat. Elena finally spoke. Her voice was smooth, melodic, yet laced with a freezing indifference that commanded absolute attention. She asked them if they were quite done barking. The smile vanished from the face of Victoria, replaced by a flash of genuine shock. This was not the broken, timid girl they had anticipated. Underneath that ridiculous outfit stood a woman who looked at them not as family, but as mere stepping stones on her path to absolute ruin. The war had officially begun. The sudden, chilling composure of the girl standing before them sent a brief, uncomfortable shiver down Victoria's spine. However, the stepmother quickly masked her unease with a sneer of pure venom. Victoria stood up, the expensive silk of her designer dress rustling in the quiet room. She stepped closer, looking at Elena with utter disdain from head to toe. "How dare you speak to us with that tone, you ungrateful brat," Victoria hissed, her voice dripping with malice. "Look at you. You look like you just crawled out of a dumpster. Do you honestly think a pathetic country mouse like you can marry into the most powerful family in New York? The Sterling dynasty does not accept trash." Chloe snickered loudly from the sofa, tossing her perfectly styled hair over her shoulder. "Seriously, Mom. Asher Sterling would vomit if he saw her. You belong with a pizza delivery boy from the slums, not a billionaire heir. I am the only one in this family fit to be a Sterling." Victoria crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing as she laid out her absolute command. "We are going to the Sterling estate right now. You will stand in front of Eleanor Sterling and you will tell her that you are breaking off the engagement voluntarily. Keep your mouth shut, nod your head, and do exactly as I say. If you ruin this for Chloe, I will make sure you end up back in that filthy barn you came from, penniless and broken." Elena offered a completely blank stare. She lowered her gaze just enough to look submissive, hiding the brilliant, calculating mind operating behind her veil of fake obedience. "Understood," she replied softly. Victoria smiled brightly, victorious in her own delusion. She turned on her heel and ordered her driver to prepare the car. The ride to the Grand Sterling estate was filled with Chloe loudly bragging about her future wedding to Asher, detailing the lavish dresses and the massive diamond she expected to receive. Elena simply gazed out the tinted window, her expression unreadable. Upon arriving at the magnificent, sprawling Sterling mansion, they were escorted by a butler into an opulent drawing room. The room reeked of old money, filled with priceless antiques and gilded mirrors. Eleanor Sterling sat like a queen on a velvet throne. She was a woman dripping in diamonds, power, and overwhelming arrogance. When her sharp eyes landed on Elena, she visibly recoiled, holding a manicured hand to her chest as if the mere sight of the girl was physically offensive. "Victoria, is this the girl?" Eleanor asked, her tone laced with absolute disgust. "Yes, Mrs. Sterling," Victoria fawned, her voice sickeningly sweet as she practically bowed. "This is Elena. She completely understands her place and wishes to formally cancel the arrangement her late mother made. She knows she is not fit for your noble family." Eleanor scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Good. My son Asher is currently studying abroad, but even if he were here, he would never accept a backwater hick. You are entirely unworthy of the Sterling name. We will consider the matter closed immediately." Victoria leaned in, her eyes gleaming with greed. "Of course. And perhaps my Chloe, who has been raised with the finest etiquette." Before Victoria could finish her sycophantic pitch, a cold, incredibly steady voice interrupted the room. "Mrs. Sterling, I would like to speak with you in private." Victoria gasped, turning to glare at her stepdaughter. "You insolent girl. Apologize at once and get out of here." But Eleanor held up a hand, a cruel, mocking smirk playing on her painted lips. She wanted to see what this desperate, filthy peasant would try to beg for. It always amused her to crush the hopes of inferiors. "Victoria, take your daughter out. Let me handle this little nuisance." Once the heavy oak doors clicked shut, sealing them inside the soundproof room, Eleanor leaned back into her chair and picked up her teacup. "You wanted privacy. Talk. If you think crying will get you a payout, you are sorely mistaken. You are nothing but a delusional beggar." Elena did not cry. She did not beg. Her posture straightened, the facade of a timid country girl melting away instantly to reveal a terrifying predator. She walked gracefully toward the heavy mahogany desk, her movements smooth, lethal, and entirely devoid of fear. "I do not agree to ending the engagement," Elena stated clearly, her voice echoing in the large room. Eleanor laughed, a harsh and grating sound that bounced off the walls. "You do not agree? Do you honestly think you have a choice in this matter? You have no money, no status, and no power. I can crush you like an insect." "You might want to look at what I have before you do that," Elena replied, completely unfazed. She reached into her cheap canvas bag and pulled out a pristine, slightly yellowed envelope. She tossed it onto the desk, letting it land right next to the fine china teacup. Eleanor glared at the envelope, then hesitantly picked it up. As she pulled out the folded paper and read the handwritten words, the color completely drained from her face. Her breathing hitched, and her hands began to tremble violently, rattling the paper. These were love letters. The deeply passionate, scandalous love letters she had written to her secret lover while already married to the former head of the Sterling family. "Where did you get these?" Eleanor whispered, her voice choking with absolute panic and dread. "My mother kept them," Elena said, her eyes locked onto the terrified woman like a hawk watching a cornered mouse. "She always said that when I met my future mother-in-law, they would make the perfect gift." Eleanor crushed the letter in her fist, her eyes wide with a sudden, murderous glint. She slammed her hands on the desk and stood up. "You little brat, are you not afraid I will kill you right here to shut you up?" Elena tilted her head, a chilling, beautiful smile curving her lips. "Kill me? Maybe. Silence me? Not a chance. The moment I die or disappear, every single letter in that collection will be broadcasted to every elite society member and news outlet in New York. Your husband will see them. The board of directors will see them. You will lose your wealth, your status, and your flawless reputation. Is that a price you are willing to pay, Mrs. Sterling?" Eleanor sank back into her chair, her chest heaving as she struggled to breathe. The arrogant queen had been completely dethroned in a matter of seconds. "What do you want? Are you blackmailing your way into my family for money?" "No, not at all," Elena said, her voice dripping with ice. "I know you will never accept me, and I have no intention of marrying your pathetic son. But I need this engagement to secure my position against the Vance family. You will keep the engagement intact for exactly 1 year. A year from today, I will cancel it myself. Why should I trust you?" Eleanor spat, her eyes filled with helpless rage. "You do not have a choice," Elena replied calmly, asserting her absolute dominance. "Furthermore, you are hosting a grand banquet in 2 days. You will invite every elite member of New York society and you will publicly announce me as the official fiancé of Asher Sterling. Can you do that?" Eleanor stared at the girl in front of her. This was no country hick. This was a calculating, ruthless monster wearing the skin of a lamb. Defeated and humiliated, Eleanor slowly nodded her head. "Very well. It is settled." Elena turned on her heel and walked toward the door. The trap was set, the board was arranged, and the game was entirely under her control. 2 days passed in a blur of arrogant taunts and insufferable bragging from Victoria and her spoiled daughter. Tonight was the night of the grand banquet. The Sterling estate had been transformed into a dazzling wonderland of wealth and excess. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over the grand ballroom, illuminating cascading champagne towers and mountains of exotic floral arrangements. The absolute elite of New York society gathered, draped in haute couture and glittering jewels, their hushed whispers filling the cavernous space. Victoria strutted into the magnificent hall with her head held high, her arm proudly linked with Chloe. The younger stepsister was wearing a ridiculously expensive designer gown covered in thousands of hand-sewn crystals, looking every bit the part of a future billionaire bride. They had maliciously forced Elena into a plain, unadorned black dress, hoping she would blend into the shadows and look like a common servant. Yet, they severely underestimated her. Even without a single piece of jewelry or elaborate makeup, Elena possessed a quiet, lethal grace. The simple fabric clung to her perfect figure, and her icy, untouchable aura made her look like a dark queen walking among commoners. Chloe sneered at Elena, leaning in close to whisper her harsh threats. She commanded Elena to stand quietly in the darkest corner and watch as Eleanor Sterling publicly announced Chloe as the new, official bride of the Sterling dynasty. Victoria smirked, holding her flute of vintage champagne elegantly, thoroughly ready to celebrate her ultimate victory and the total humiliation of her stepdaughter. Elena merely offered a faint, chilling smile. She said absolutely nothing, her dark eyes fixed intently on the grand marble staircase. The low murmur of the ballroom fell into a sudden, respectful silence as Eleanor Sterling descended the stairs. She looked regal in a deep emerald gown, but anyone observing closely could see the tight, strained tension around her eyes. Her knuckles were white as she gripped the silver microphone. Eleanor looked out over the crowd, her gaze flicking for a fraction of a second toward the shadows where Elena stood. A flash of pure dread crossed the face of the older woman before she composed herself. Eleanor welcomed the esteemed guests, speaking highly of family legacy and the deep bonds that held their high society together. Victoria nudged Chloe forward, anticipation radiating from them like heat. Chloe lifted her chin, preparing to step into the spotlight. Then, Eleanor cleared her throat, her voice trembling just slightly. She announced that the primary purpose of the evening was to celebrate a sacred promise, an unbreakable union between the Sterling and Vance families. She took a deep, visibly reluctant breath. Through gritted teeth, she formally introduced the official fiancé of her son Asher. It was not Chloe. It was Elena Vance. The ballroom erupted into polite but deeply confused applause. Victoria dropped her crystal champagne glass. It shattered violently against the polished marble floor, the loud crash masked only by the clapping of the guests. Chloe turned deathly pale, her jaw dropping in sheer, unadulterated disbelief. She glared at her mother, then whipped her head toward Elena, her pretty face twisting into an ugly mask of absolute rage. Elena did not gloat. She simply raised her glass of sparkling water in a slow, mocking toast toward her horrified stepmother. The trap had snapped shut flawlessly. Unable to accept this crushing defeat, Chloe felt her humiliation morph into venomous fury. She stormed over to her group of wealthy, entitled friends, her eyes burning with malicious intent. She frantically whispered vicious lies, painting Elena as a manipulative, uneducated beggar from the countryside who had used some dark, underhanded trick to blind the noble Eleanor. The flock of shallow socialites, always eager for fresh drama, quickly surrounded Elena. They inspected her plain black dress with exaggerated, theatrical disgust. One of them, a blonde heiress dripping in diamonds, loudly mocked Elena. She asked in a shrill voice if they even had electricity in the muddy barn she grew up in. Another girl laughed cruelly, asking if Elena knew how to hold a proper conversation or if she only knew how to grunt at farm animals. Elena looked at them with eyes so cold they could freeze boiling water, utterly unfazed by the pathetic barking of spoiled children. Just then, the grand orchestra began to tune their classical instruments. The master of ceremonies announced that it was time for the opening waltz, a strict tradition dictating that the newly announced fiancé must take the floor for the first dance. Since Asher was absent, she was expected to dance solo or be escorted by a representative. Chloe saw her golden opportunity for absolute destruction. She raised her voice, ensuring the surrounding crowd of influential guests could hear every word. She loudly declared that her poor, uneducated sister had never seen the inside of a real ballroom. She mocked that the only dance Elena knew was a clumsy, pathetic stomp from a rural truck stop. The group of heiresses laughed maliciously, forming a tight circle to physically push Elena out into the very center of the grand, brightly lit dance floor. They taunted her loudly, demanding she show them her pathetic country moves. They wanted her to trip, to panic, to run out of the magnificent estate in tears of shame. Hundreds of judging eyes bored into the lone figure in the black dress. The orchestra raised their bows, waiting for the cue. Chloe smirked triumphantly from the sidelines, her arms crossed as she waited for the inevitable disaster. But Elena did not tremble. She did not lower her head or show a single ounce of fear. She stood perfectly still under the massive crystal chandelier, her posture radiating an effortless, terrifying majesty, completely ready for the music to begin. The heavy silence in the grand ballroom was suffocating. Hundreds of wealthy elites stared at the lone figure in the center of the polished marble floor. Chloe stood on the periphery with her arms crossed, a wicked smirk twisting her face as she waited eagerly for the grand humiliation to unfold. The orchestra conductor raised his baton, his hands trembling slightly under the intense scrutiny of the room. Elena remained perfectly still. She did not tremble or cower. She simply waited with the supreme poise of a queen about to inspect her utterly worthless subjects. Before the first note could even be played, the massive double doors of the ballroom swung violently open. The loud, resounding thud echoed against the high ceilings, instantly drawing every single eye away from the dance floor. A collective gasp rippled through the glittering crowd. Julian Sterling had arrived. He was a man who practically owned the entire city of New York, a phantom of absolute power and terrifying ruthlessness who despised frivolous social gatherings. He walked into the brightly lit room wearing a flawlessly tailored midnight black suit that seemed to absorb the light around him. His presence was entirely suffocating. The air grew heavy, thick with the primal danger that radiated from his every deliberate step. The elite guests hastily parted like the Red Sea, lowering their heads in fearful reverence, terrified to even make eye contact. Eleanor Sterling visibly paled on her grand podium, her hands gripping the edges of the wooden stand so tightly her knuckles turned white as she stared at her terrifying stepson in sheer panic. Julian did not look at his stepmother. His dark, predatory eyes swept lazily over the terrified crowd before locking onto the center of the dance floor. He stopped abruptly. A slow, dangerously mesmerizing smirk spread across his handsome, chiseled face. Standing right there, surrounded by mocking socialites, was the fearless girl from the abandoned hotel. The little thief who had stolen his limited edition Browning 9mm. Mary, or so she had claimed. Without uttering a single word of greeting to the hosts, Julian began to walk toward the center of the room. His long, purposeful strides carried him directly toward Elena. Chloe, completely misunderstanding the situation, stepped forward with an eager, sickeningly sweet smile. She foolishly believed the ruthless billionaire was coming to personally throw the rural beggar out of his prestigious family estate. Chloe opened her mouth to speak, fully ready to offer her assistance in removing the trash, but Julian did not even grant her a fraction of a glance. He walked straight past Chloe as if she were nothing more than empty air, leaving her standing frozen in absolute, agonizing mortification. Julian stopped mere inches from Elena. He looked down at her, his dark eyes burning with an intense, possessive heat that could effortlessly melt steel. The entire ballroom held its breath, waiting for the wrath of the mafia boss to fall upon the poor girl. Instead, Julian raised a hand and snapped his fingers toward the orchestra. The sharp sound cracked through the quiet room like a whip. The conductor immediately scrambled, waving his baton frantically to start a sweeping, dramatic waltz. Julian did not ask for permission. He reached out, his large, powerful hand gripping the slender waist of Elena, and pulled her flush against his solid chest. A chorus of shocked gasps erupted from the surrounding crowd. The eldest sterling heir, the merciless demon of the underworld, was dancing with the supposedly uneducated country fiancé of his mute younger brother. Elena did not panic. She did not miss a single beat of the complex rhythm. As Julian swept her across the vast marble floor, she followed his incredibly demanding lead with flawless, breathtaking precision. Her posture was impeccably regal, her footwork light and absolutely perfect. They moved together like two apex predators engaged in a beautiful, deadly battle of dominance. The plain black dress she wore flowed around her like dark water, making her look infinitely more elegant and commanding than any of the women dripping in expensive jewels and designer labels. The malicious whispers of the heiresses died instantly, replaced by wide-eyed shock. The arrogant smirk vanished completely from the face of Chloe, replaced by a twisted mask of pure, devastating humiliation. Victoria dug her manicured nails into her own palms until they bled, entirely unable to comprehend how the feral child she had banished to a muddy farm possessed the refined grace of a European royal. The face slapping was completely silent, delivered heavily through the sheer, undeniable perfection of her movements. As they spun rapidly under the blinding light of the massive crystal chandeliers, Julian leaned down, his lips brushing dangerously close to her ear. "You lie to me, Mary," he murmured, his deep voice vibrating with a dark, thrilling amusement. "You are not just a sneaky little thief. You are the future wife of my pathetic little brother." Elena kept her gaze fixed firmly on his broad shoulder, her expression as cold and impenetrable as ice. "And you are currently making a massive spectacle of your own family, Mr. Sterling. I suggest you let me go before your stepmother suffers a genuine heart attack." Julian chuckled, tightening his unyielding grip on her waist, pulling her even closer until there was absolutely no space between their bodies. "I do not care about Eleanor or her weak son. The moment you walked into my line of fire and stole my weapon, you became mine. A piece of paper signing you over to Asher means absolutely nothing to me." "Your arrogance is incredibly boring," Elena replied smoothly, executing a highly complicated spin without breaking a single sweat. "I am not a shiny prize to be claimed by a mafia boss with a massive god complex. Keep your hands to yourself, or I might be tempted to finish the job those incompetent assassins started at the hotel." Julian threw his head back and laughed. The rich, genuine sound echoed loudly through the silent ballroom, sending a fresh wave of utter shock through the elite guests who had never seen the ruthless tyrant display such raw, unbridled emotion. He looked back down at her, his dark eyes blazing with absolute, terrifying obsession. "I love it when you threaten me," he whispered fiercely, his breath fanning across her neck. "But understand this, little thief. I always get exactly what I want. And I want you." The classical music swelled to a magnificent, thunderous crescendo. Julian dipped Elena low, suspending her perfectly above the polished marble floor with effortless strength. She stared up into his dark, possessing eyes, refusing to look away, refusing to submit to his overwhelming gravity. The song ended abruptly, leaving the entire ballroom in a state of stunned, absolute silence. Elena had not only survived their cruel, calculated trap, but she had utterly conquered the room, standing tall and victorious right beside the most dangerous man in the city. The morning after the grand banquet brought a swift and unquestionable development. A heavy envelope sealed with red wax arrived at the Vance Manor. It contained a direct summons from Beatrice Sterling, the supreme matriarch of the dynasty and the grandmother of Julian and Asher. Beatrice resided in a sprawling, heavily guarded fortress of an estate in the Hamptons. She had heard of the absolute spectacle at the banquet and demanded an immediate audience with the supposed country girl who had successfully entranced her ruthless eldest grandson and secured the title of fiancé to her youngest. Elena stepped out of a sleek black town car onto the pristine gravel driveway of the Hamptons estate. The salty ocean breeze whipped through her dark hair. She wore a simple yet flawlessly tailored navy suit, presenting a perfect image of cold professionalism. A stoic butler escorted her through the grand, sunlit corridors toward the opulent rear conservatory. The room was encased in massive glass windows overlooking the crashing waves of the Atlantic Ocean. When the heavy double doors opened, Elena instantly realized she was walking into a highly calculated ambush. Sitting around an exquisite glass table were not only Beatrice Sterling, who possessed sharp hawk-like eyes and an aura of absolute authority, but also Eleanor. To make matters exponentially worse, Victoria and Chloe sat on a velvet love seat nearby. They had been specially invited by Eleanor to help destroy Elena right in front of the supreme matriarch. Eleanor offered a tight, poisonous smile, her eyes glittering with malicious anticipation. The older women planned to strip away the disguise of Elena and expose her as a pathetic fraud. Beatrice ordered Elena to sit. The matriarch did not offer a cup of tea or any polite pleasantries. She immediately launched into a brutal interrogation regarding the upbringing, education, and true intentions of the young woman sitting before her. Before Elena could even finish a single sentence, Eleanor interrupted, loudly lamenting the terrible misfortune of her son Asher being tied to a girl with zero refinement. Chloe giggled behind her manicured hand, eagerly adding that Elena lacked basic table manners and had shamelessly thrown herself at Julian during the banquet just to climb the social ladder. Victoria sighed dramatically, playing the role of a grieving mother who had tried and failed to civilize a feral child raised in the dirt. Elena sat perfectly straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She allowed the pack of hyenas to bark, completely unbothered by their desperate attempts to tear her down. When they finally paused to take a breath, expecting to see her completely broken, Elena met the sharp gaze of Beatrice directly. She spoke with a calm, melodic voice, effortlessly dismantling every single accusation with sheer logic and chilling indifference. She pointed out that true elegance did not require shouting, and that vast wealth without a functioning intellect was simply a shiny cage. Beatrice narrowed her ancient eyes, a flicker of genuine intrigue breaking through her stern facade. The matriarch was not easily impressed by anyone, yet this young woman radiated a terrifying, quiet power that closely mirrored Julian himself. Eleanor, furious that her careful plan was completely failing, stood up abruptly and pointed a shaking finger at Elena. She screamed that Elena was a manipulative witch who was actively poisoning the Sterling household. But before Eleanor could finish her hysterical rant, a sudden, horrifying gasp echoed through the sunny conservatory. All heads snapped toward the head of the table. Beatrice Sterling had gone deathly pale. Her hands clawed desperately at her chest, the expensive fabric of her dress wrinkling as her knuckles turned stark white. She struggled violently to draw a single breath, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. The delicate porcelain teacup in her hand slipped, shattering violently against the expensive marble floor. Her eyes rolled back, and the powerful matriarch collapsed heavily onto the table, her body convulsing slightly before sliding toward the cold ground. Complete and utter pandemonium erupted in the room. Eleanor shrieked in absolute terror, backing away from the falling woman instead of rushing to help her. Chloe burst into hysterical, entirely useless tears, covering her eyes and sobbing loudly. Victoria froze in sheer panic, her mind completely blank as she stared at the dying woman. The stoic butler rushed forward, yelling into his radio for someone to call the estate doctor immediately. But the frantic voice on the other end confirmed that the doctor had been sent into town to gather specific medical supplies and was at least 20 minutes away. Beatrice was rapidly turning a sickening shade of blue, her pulse failing by the second. They were watching the most powerful woman in the entire dynasty slip directly into the jaws of death. Eleanor hysterically commanded everyone to stay back, screaming that nobody should touch the matriarch lest they be blamed for her sudden demise. She was more concerned with avoiding legal liability than saving a human life. In the midst of the cowardly, paralyzed foals, Elena stood up. Her eyes narrowed, all traces of the polite guest vanishing instantly. She kicked her expensive heels aside to gain better traction on the marble floor. Ignoring the frantic screaming of Eleanor and the useless sobbing of Chloe, Elena moved toward the dying woman with the lethal speed and absolute precision of a seasoned predator preparing to strike. Elena dropped to her knees beside the gasping matriarch, her swift movements a stark contrast to the frozen panic of the room. She immediately pressed her fingers against the neck of Beatrice, searching for a pulse. It was erratic, fading rapidly. Without a second of hesitation, Elena tilted the head of the older woman back to open her airway and positioned her hands squarely over the center of her chest. Before she could begin the compressions, a manicured hand clawed roughly at her shoulder. Eleanor shrieked, her face twisted in a mask of hysterical fury. She demanded that the filthy country girl remove her hands from the supreme matriarch, accusing Elena of trying to murder the old woman to hasten her inheritance. Victoria chimed in, shouting for the guards to drag the feral brat away before she caused irreparable damage. Chloe wailed louder, a pathetic background noise to the absolute chaos. Elena did not even flinch. She violently shoved the hand of Eleanor away with such brutal force that the older woman stumbled backward and crashed into an expensive marble pillar. Elena began precise, powerful chest compressions, her face set in stone. She barked a sharp command at the paralyzed butler, demanding the emergency medical kit from the study, specifically calling for the epinephrine auto-injector she knew a household with an elderly cardiac patient would possess. Eleanor recovered her balance, her face flushed with unprecedented rage. She screamed for the estate security to arrest Elena immediately. Two burly guards rushed into the conservatory, their hands reaching for their weapons. Suddenly, the grand glass door shattered inwardly as a heavy boot kicked them open. Julian Sterling strode into the room, bringing with him an aura of absolute, suffocating terror. His dark eyes swept over the chaotic scene in a fraction of a second, registering his dying grandmother, the screaming relatives, and the calm, unwavering girl performing flawless medical resuscitation on the floor. Eleanor saw her stepson and instantly pointed an accusing finger at Elena. She cried out that the rural beggar was trying to kill Beatrice and begged Julian to stop her. Julian did not ask questions. He did not hesitate. In one smooth, lightning-fast motion, he drew a sleek black handgun from his tailored suit jacket and aimed it directly at the forehead of Eleanor. The hysterical shrieking died instantly. The guards froze in their tracks, raising their hands in immediate surrender. The entire room plunged into a dead, terrifying silence, broken only by the rhythmic, heavy breathing of Elena as she continued the chest compressions. Julian swept his cold, murderous gaze over his stepmother, Victoria, and Chloe. His voice was low, vibrating with a lethal promise. He stated clearly that if anyone took a single step toward his girl, he would personally decorate the glass walls with their brains. Under the absolute protection of the mafia boss, the butler rushed in with the red medical bag. Elena snatched it, her hands steady as she retrieved the auto-injector. She plunged the needle directly into the thigh of Beatrice, holding it there for 3 seconds before resuming the chest compressions. She counted out loud, her voice echoing in the silent room, commanding the heart of the matriarch to beat again. An agonizing minute passed. Then, Beatrice suddenly gasped loudly, her chest heaving as a rush of air filled her lungs. Her eyelids fluttered open, glassy but focused. The sickly blue hue began to fade from her lips, replaced by the faint flush of returning circulation. Right at that moment, the estate doctor burst into the room, breathless and panicked. He quickly examined Beatrice, looking up at Elena with absolute awe. He announced to the stunned room that the girl had performed a textbook-perfect resuscitation. Had she waited even one more minute, Beatrice Sterling would have been dead. Beatrice, weak but entirely lucid, weakly reached out and grabbed the wrist of Elena. The Supreme Matriarch did not offer a grand speech, but the profound gratitude and newfound respect in her sharp eyes spoke volumes. She hoarsely commanded Julian to ensure that the savior of the Sterling family was escorted home with the utmost safety and respect. Julian smirked, holstering his weapon. He looked at Elena like a starving predator looking at an exquisite feast. He promised his grandmother that he would take incredibly good care of her. Elena tried to refuse the ride, but Julian offered no room for argument. His large hand gripped her lower back with possessive iron strength, steering her out of the estate and directly into the back seat of his heavily armored black limousine. The moment the heavy doors slammed shut, the privacy partition between them and the driver glided up, sealing them in absolute, soundproof isolation. The spacious interior of the car felt incredibly small as Julian closed the distance between them. The streetlights from the passing highway cast shifting shadows over his handsome, dangerous face. He cornered her against the luxurious leather upholstery, his dark eyes burning with an intense, consuming fire. He praised her ruthlessness, marveling at how a supposedly uneducated country girl possessed the medical mastery of a top-tier surgeon and the cold nerves of a seasoned assassin. Before Elena could issue a sharp retort, Julian lunged. He pinned her wrists to the leather seat with one hand and tangled his other hand in her dark hair, forcing his lips crashing down onto hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a brutal, punishing, and violently possessive claiming, meant to brand her as his own property. He demanded her submission, his tongue seeking to conquer her completely. Elena did not melt into his embrace. She did not panic, nor did she struggle uselessly against his overwhelming physical strength. Her eyes remained wide open, completely devoid of fear. With a smooth, practiced twist of her wrist, she broke her right hand free from his grip. She reached down into the hidden pocket of her suit jacket. As Julian deepened the kiss, completely lost in his own arrogance, he suddenly froze. A heavy, freezing ring of steel was pressed firmly against the soft flesh directly under his chin. Julian slowly pulled back, looking down. Elena was holding his own stolen 9mm Browning. The safety clicked entirely off, her finger resting lightly on the hair trigger. Her lips were swollen from his forceful kiss, but her expression was as cold and unforgiving as a winter storm. She looked the most dangerous man in New York dead in the eye. Her voice was a soft, deadly whisper. She told him that if he ever touched her without her permission again, she would blow his perfect head clean off his shoulders. Julian stared at the barrel of his own gun, then looked up into her blazing, defiant eyes. Instead of anger, a dark, completely unhinged smile spread across his face. He was not deterred. He was absolutely mesmerized. The heavy barrel of the 9mm pressed firmly against his throat, but Julian did not flinch. Instead, he let out a low, vibrating chuckle that rumbled through the quiet interior of the limousine. He raised one hand, moving with agonizing slowness, and gently wrapped his long fingers over hers, completely ignoring the deadly threat. He slowly pushed the weapon away from his chin, his dark eyes never leaving her face. He murmured that a queen should never dirty her own hands, especially not in the back of a car. Instead of ordering the driver to take her back to the toxic Vance estate, Julian pressed a button on the intercom. He gave a sharp command, redirecting the armored vehicle to his private territory. Elena did not protest. She knew that running from a predator only triggered their hunting instinct. She simply clicked the safety back onto the gun and slipped it into her pocket, waiting to see what the devil had planned. The limousine descended into a hidden, heavily fortified underground facility beneath the glittering skyline of Manhattan. Julian escorted her through a maze of biometric security doors until they emerged into a vast, state-of-the-art private shooting range. The air smelled sharply of gunpowder and cold steel. The facility was entirely empty, reserved exclusively for the supreme boss of the underworld. Julian walked over to a polished metallic table lined with an arsenal of lethal weaponry. He picked up a sleek silver handgun, loaded a fresh magazine with practiced ease, and turned back to look at her. His gaze was dark, heavy with unspoken desires. He told her that a woman navigating a world of blood and betrayal needed to know how to properly defend herself. He ordered her to step forward. Elena knew perfectly well how to handle a firearm, but she played along, stepping into the shooting bay. Julian immediately closed the distance, standing directly behind her. His broad chest pressed flush against her back, radiating an overwhelming, suffocating heat. He reached around her, his large hands covering hers as he guided her grip on the silver weapon. The physical contact was entirely deliberate, a masterclass in psychological dominance and raw possession. His breath ghosted over the sensitive skin of her neck as he adjusted her stance, his voice dropping to a rough, hypnotic whisper as he instructed her to aim for the heart of the paper target. Elena kept her breathing perfectly even, refusing to let him see how his overwhelming proximity affected her. She pulled the trigger. The deafening crack echoed through the soundproof chamber, and a perfect hole appeared dead center in the chest of the target. Julian smirked against her hair, praising her lethal instincts. But Elena had not come here to play games. She lowered the weapon and turned her head slightly, her cheek brushing against his jaw. She looked at him with chilling clarity. She stated that she had saved his life at the hotel and revived his grandmother today. In return for her absolute competence, she demanded access to his vast, invisible intelligence network. She needed to know the exact details surrounding the death of her mother 16 years ago. Julian stared down at her, his dark eyes gleaming with profound approval. He loved a woman who knew how to leverage her worth. He slowly stepped back, releasing her from his suffocating embrace. He walked over to a leather briefcase resting on a nearby bench, snapped the locks open, and pulled out a thick, classified file. He tossed it onto the metal table in front of her. Elena opened the folder. Inside were heavily redacted police reports, old photographs, and a newly acquired, highly illegal autopsy analysis. Julian leaned against the table, crossing his muscular arms. He revealed the dark truth his network had unearthed. The official records stated her mother had slipped and fallen from the high balcony of the Vance Manor. However, the hidden toxicology report indicated a massive, lethal dose of morphine in her bloodstream right before the fall. She was disoriented, drugged, and ultimately murdered. The blood in the veins of Elena ran cold. Her grip on the paper tightened until her knuckles turned white. She had always suspected foul play, but seeing the undeniable proof ignited a terrifying, icy rage deep within her soul. Victoria and Eleanor were no longer just greedy opportunists, they were cold-blooded killers. Julian was not finished. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a serious, calculated tone. He told her that his men had tracked down a former servant who worked at the Vance estate on that exact day. The servant confessed a vital piece of information. At the precise moment her mother was pushed from the balcony, a young boy had been hiding in the gardens below, completely unnoticed by the killers. Elena looked up, her mind racing with deadly precision. Julian confirmed her dark suspicion. The boy was his younger brother, Asher Sterling. The horrific trauma of witnessing a brutal murder firsthand was the exact psychological trigger that had struck Asher completely mute for the past 16 years. A chilling realization washed over Elena. Her supposedly pathetic, silent fiancé was the only living witness to the murder of her mother. He held the key to destroying Victoria and whoever else was involved. A brilliant, ruthless plan began to form in her sharp mind. She would use her advanced degree in psychotherapy. She would break the silence of Asher Sterling, tear the truth from his traumatized subconscious, and use his own voice to utterly annihilate her enemies. Exactly 2 days after the revelation in the underground shooting range, the heavy iron gates of the main Sterling estate swung open to welcome the return of the second heir. Asher Sterling had arrived from his prolonged stay in Europe. He stepped out of his sleek vehicle, looking every bit the refined, wealthy aristocrat. He was undeniably handsome, with soft features and perfectly styled hair, but to the sharp eyes of Elena, he was entirely pathetic. He lacked the terrifying, world-conquering aura of his older brother. Asher radiated a weak, fragile energy, carrying the heavy burden of a 16-year silence like a cowardly shield. Beatrice Sterling, now fully recovered and radiating her usual terrifying authority, summoned the entire family to the grand parlor to welcome her youngest grandson. Eleanor hovered over Asher like a desperate hawk, her hands constantly fixing his lapels, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Julian stood casually by the grand fireplace, a glass of dark liquor in his hand, his predatory gaze locked onto Elena. He knew exactly what she was about to do, and he was thoroughly enjoying the deadly show. After the formal pleasantries concluded, Elena stepped forward into the center of the room. She did not lower her head or act like the timid country girl they all expected. She looked directly at the supreme matriarch. With a perfectly modulated, professional tone, Elena announced that she possessed an advanced, top-tier degree in clinical psychotherapy. She revealed that she had secretly studied and mastered trauma recovery during her years in exile. Then, she dropped the ultimate bomb. She formally requested absolute permission to begin intense psychological treatment on Asher, promising to cure his muteness. The grand parlor descended into a stunned, deafening silence. Then, Eleanor absolutely exploded. The older woman leaped to her feet, her face flushed with unprecedented panic and raw terror. She screamed that the proposal was completely absurd and highly insulting. She reminded everyone that the wealthiest specialists, the most renowned neurologists, and the top psychiatrists in the entire world had tried and failed to cure Asher for 16 long years. She pointed a trembling finger at Elena, loudly declaring that a filthy, uneducated peasant who bought a fake online degree had absolutely no right to experiment on the fragile mind of a sterling heir. The panic in the eyes of Eleanor was palpable. Elena observed the hysterical woman with chilling satisfaction. Eleanor was not trying to protect the mental health of her son. She was terrified that the locked doors of his memory would be blown wide open, exposing the brutal murder of the mother of Elena to the entire world. Before the screaming could escalate further, Beatrice slammed her heavy wooden cane against the polished marble floor. The sharp crack instantly silenced the room. The supreme matriarch glared at her daughter-in-law with utter disdain. Beatrice stated in a cold, unquestionable voice that the medical specialists of the world had not saved her life 2 days ago, but Elena had. She declared that Elena possessed a miraculous, undeniable gift. Therefore, Elena was granted absolute authority over the medical treatment of Asher, and anyone who dared to interfere would be permanently exiled from the family. Eleanor collapsed back into her chair, her face draining of all color. She looked as though she had just been handed a death sentence. Julian took a slow sip of his liquor, a dark, incredibly proud smirk playing on his lips. Within the hour, Elena escorted Asher into a secluded, soundproof study situated in the western wing of the estate. She locked the heavy mahogany door, sealing them inside. The soft, ambient light cast long shadows across the walls. Asher stood awkwardly in the center of the room, offering her a gentle, hesitant smile. He expected his beautiful new fiancée to hold his hand, to speak to him with sweet, comforting words, and to treat him like the fragile prince he had always been. He was disastrously mistaken. The moment the lock clicked, the demeanor of Elena shifted completely. The polite, respectful facade vanished, replaced by the freezing, ruthless aura of an apex predator. She ordered him to sit in the heavy leather recliner. Her voice was not soft. It was a sharp, commanding blade that left no room for hesitation or disobedience. Asher blinked in surprise, feeling a sudden wave of intimidation, but he complied, sinking into the chair. Elena stood over him, her dark eyes piercing directly into his soul. She did not use soothing music or gentle persuasion. She retrieved a heavy silver metronome from the desk, set it to a slow, rhythmic ticking, and placed it directly in his line of sight. She instructed him to look at the swinging needle. When he tried to look away, she snapped her fingers sharply, commanding his absolute, undivided attention. She began the course of hypnosis, utilizing highly aggressive, borderline illegal psychological tactics designed to violently break down mental barriers. She bypassed his conscious defenses, her voice a relentless, hypnotic drone that dragged his mind into the darkest, most terrifying corners of his subconscious. She told him that he was no longer a grown man in a safe mansion. She forced his mind to travel backward. 14 years, 15 years, 16 years. The breathing of Asher became rapid and shallow. Sweat began to bead on his forehead. His hands gripped the armrests of the leather chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. He was trapped in the mesmerizing, inescapable web of her voice. Elena leaned in close, her tone dropping to a chilling, ghostly whisper. She painted the scene with terrifying precision. She told him he was 10 years old again. He was standing in the lush, blooming gardens of the Vance estate. The sun was shining. He was looking up at the high stone balcony. She demanded to know what he saw. She pushed harder, her command striking his fragile mind like a hammer against cracked glass. She was not just a doctor treating a patient. She was an executioner demanding a confession, fully prepared to shatter his mind into a million pieces if it meant extracting the bloody truth. The rhythmic ticking of the silver metronome sliced through the heavy silence of the study. Tick, tick, tick. Elena stood over the trembling air, her gaze entirely devoid of pity. Asher was trapped deep within the labyrinth of his own mind, dragged backward through time by the sheer, unyielding force of her commands. Sweat poured down his pale face, soaking the collar of his expensive shirt. His breathing was rapid, shallow, and laced with pure panic. Elena leaned closer, her voice a sharp, hypnotic blade cutting away the final layers of his conscious resistance. She demanded him to look up at the high stone balcony of the Vance estate. She ordered him to witness the nightmare he had buried for 16 long years. Asher squeezed his eyes shut. His head thrashed wildly against the leather headrest. His hands, gripping the armrests, shook with violent tremors. He was experiencing the raw, unfiltered terror of a 10-year-old boy hiding in the rose bushes, completely paralyzed by fear. His mouth opened in a silent, agonizing scream, the exact same reaction that had sealed his lips for over a decade and a half. But Elena refused to let him hide. She placed her cold, steady hands on the sides of his face, forcing his head still. She did not offer comfort. She offered absolute compulsion. She told him that the silence was over. She commanded his vocal cords to awaken, demanding that he describe every single detail of the scene unfolding in his shattered memory. The psychological pressure in the room reached a breaking point. Asher began to hyperventilate. The mental dam that had held back his trauma for 16 years finally cracked under her ruthless assault. A harsh, ragged gasp tore from his throat. It was followed by a wet, guttural choke as his dormant vocal cords strained against the sudden rush of air. Then, breaking the profound silence of 16 years, a single, agonizing word ripped through the quiet study. No. The voice was incredibly rough, raw like crushed glass, and dripping with the absolute despair of a terrified child. Tears flooded from his tightly shut eyes, streaming down his cheeks in hot, rapid rivers. He began to sob violently, his entire body convulsing in the heavy leather chair. Elena did not display a single ounce of surprise or triumph. Her expression remained as cold and hard as a diamond. With deliberate precision, she reached into the inner pocket of her blazer and pressed a small button on a highly advanced, discreet audio recorder. The tiny red light blinked to life, ready to capture the ultimate weapon. She lowered her voice, making it a dark, commanding whisper that echoed directly into his subconscious mind. She praised him for speaking. Then, she demanded the names. She asked him who was standing on the balcony with the beautiful lady. Asher whimpered, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form the syllables. He whimpered that the beautiful lady was falling asleep. He said she looked dizzy, leaning heavily against the stone railing. Elena felt a sharp, icy spike of rage pierce her chest, knowing he was describing the exact moment the lethal dose of morphine took effect on her mother. "Who is holding her, Asher?" Elena demanded, her tone leaving absolutely no room for escape. "Tell me exactly who you see." Asher gasped for air, his face contorting in sheer agony. He stuttered, his voice breaking into a pathetic, high-pitched wail. He said he saw the wicked woman. The woman with the sharp smile who always visited the house. He forced the name out of his raw throat. Victoria. He described Victoria holding a small, shiny needle, tossing it carelessly onto the stone floor after plunging it into the arm of the beautiful lady. Elena felt her blood turn into liquid ice, but she needed the final piece of the puzzle. She needed the second name. She leaned down until her lips were mere inches from his ear. She asked him who the other woman was. She asked who helped Victoria push the dying lady over the edge. Asher violently shook his head, desperately trying to protect his deepest, darkest secret. He cried out, begging Elena to stop, pleading that the bad woman would lock him away if he told the truth. Elena showed zero mercy. She snapped her fingers sharply right next to his ear, a sound like a gunshot in his hypnotic state. She commanded him to speak the name or be trapped in this agonizing nightmare forever. The final wall of his subconscious shattered completely. Asher threw his head back and wailed in absolute, soul-crushing defeat. He sobbed uncontrollably as he confessed the horrifying truth. "My mother," Asher wept, his raspy voice echoing loudly off the soundproof walls. "It is my mother, Eleanor." She grabbed the legs of the beautiful lady. Victoria grabbed her shoulders. They pushed her. They pushed her over the edge. Asher curled inward, wrapping his arms tightly around his own chest as he vividly relived the sickening thud of the body hitting the marble patio below. He continued to cry, a broken, pathetic mess of a man, blindly confessing the gruesome details of the murder committed by his own mother and the stepmother of Elena. Elena stood perfectly still, letting the digital device record every single ragged breath and every damning word. The truth she had chased for 16 long years was finally laid bare, captured flawlessly in high-definition audio. The profound grief for her mother was quickly swallowed by a massive, all-consuming inferno of vindictive rage. Victoria Vance and Eleanor Sterling had played God with the life of her mother. Now, Elena held the absolute power to destroy them completely. She looked down at the weeping heir in the chair. He had finally spoken, but his words had only cemented his ultimate doom. Elena slowly reached out and stopped the swinging needle of the silver metronome. The rhythmic ticking ceased immediately, plunging the study back into a heavy, suffocating silence. She slipped the audio recorder back into her pocket, her beautiful face twisting into a terrifying, triumphant smile. The trop was fully loaded, and the execution was entirely imminent. Elena snapped her fingers 3 times. The sharp, cracking sound pulled Asher violently out of the dark, suffocating abyss of his own mind. He gasped loudly, his eyes flying open, wild, and completely disoriented. His throat burned with the raw, agonizing ache of disuse, but the intense physical pain was absolutely nothing compared to the horrifying realization crashing down upon his fragile psyche. He had spoken. He had confessed every single detail of the gruesome nightmare. He stared at Elena. She was calmly organizing her notes on the heavy mahogany desk, her beautiful face an impenetrable mask of pure professionalism. She did not look like a woman who had just uncovered the brutal murder of her own mother. She smoothly turned to him, praising his immense progress in a gentle, melodic tone, instructing him to rest in the chair while she fetched him a glass of warm water. She stepped out of the study, leaving the heavy oak door slightly ajar. Left entirely alone in the dim room, Asher trembled uncontrollably. The heavy, suffocating weight of his confession threatened to crush his very soul. He had explicitly exposed his own mother as a ruthless, cold-blooded killer. If Elena took that damning information to the authorities, Eleanor would spend the rest of her miserable life rotting in a maximum security federal prison. But vastly more terrifying to the incredibly weak heir was the inevitable, catastrophic fallout that would destroy his own life. The Sterling dynasty would face an unprecedented, earth-shattering scandal. Julian, his terrifying older brother, would utterly annihilate him, stripping him of his massive inheritance, his limitless black cards, and his prestigious social standing. Julian would toss him into the gutter without a single ounce of hesitation. Asher stared at his shaking, sweat-drenched hands. He did not possess even a fraction of the courage required to seek justice. He was a pathetic coward, deeply and hopelessly addicted to his immense wealth and his pristine, untouchable reputation. He made his horrific choice in an instant. He would protect his murderous mother. He would protect his golden throne. He scrambled frantically out of the heavy leather recliner and fled the study like a terrified rat, desperate to find Eleanor before Elena returned. Asher burst into the private, lavish quarters of Eleanor. His mother was pacing nervously across the thick Persian rug, her face pulled tight with anxiety. When she saw him barge in, she immediately demanded to know what that feral, uneducated girl had done to him behind closed doors. Asher opened his mouth, the dormant muscles in his neck and jaw straining painfully against the sudden demand. He forced out a single, rough, incredibly raspy word, calling her mother. Eleanor froze completely, her eyes widening in sheer, ecstatic disbelief. The impossible had happened. Her precious son had finally regained his voice. She rushed forward with open arms, tears of absolute joy welling in her eyes, preparing to embrace him. But Asher violently pushed her away, his face twisted in absolute, unadulterated terror. He rasped out the devastating, world-ending truth. He told her that under the brutal, inescapable hypnosis of Elena, the mental walls had shattered. He told Eleanor that he remembered every single detail from 16 years ago. He explicitly stated that he knew she and Victoria Vance had murdered the mother of Elena. The ecstatic joy vanished from the face of Eleanor in a fraction of a millisecond, replaced instantly by a ghastly, deathly pallor. She stumbled backward as if she had been physically struck, clutching her diamond-adorned chest as her breathing turned shallow and erratic. Asher wept openly, falling to his knees, begging his mother to fix the catastrophic mess, utterly terrified of losing his billionaire status. Eleanor looked down at her pathetic, sobbing son. The brief moment of maternal shock quickly evaporated, entirely consumed by a manic, murderous desperation. She grabbed his shoulders, her perfectly manicured nails digging deep into the expensive fabric of his tailored suit. Her eyes burned with a dark, lethal intent. She hissed through her teeth that they had to eliminate Elena immediately, long before the grand engagement party tomorrow night. The bloody truth could never see the light of day, and the rural beggar had to be silenced permanently. At that exact same moment, inside the cold, unwelcoming walls of the Vance Manor, a highly similar atmosphere of pure, suffocating panic was rapidly brewing. Victoria and Chloe paced the grand living room like caged, desperate animals facing their inevitable slaughter. The rapid, unstoppable ascension of Elena within the almighty Sterling family was an absolute, waking nightmare. Tomorrow was the grand engagement party. Once Elena officially solidified her immense power and secured her position within the underworld dynasty, she would undoubtedly crush the Vance family without a single ounce of mercy. Chloe aggressively bit her acrylic fingernails, whining loudly that they were going to lose their entire fortune and their elite social status. She demanded her mother do something drastic to stop the impending wedding. Victoria stopped pacing. A dark, incredibly sinister shadow fell over her heavily contoured, aging face. She looked toward the grand marble staircase leading to the guest bedrooms, her eyes narrowing with cold, lethal calculation. She coldly stated that Elena would never make it to the engagement party. Victoria walked purposefully over to a locked, antique mahogany cabinet hidden in the corner of the room. She entered a secret combination, opened the small drawer, and retrieved a tiny, unmarked glass vial filled with a clear liquid. Chloe gasped loudly, instantly recognizing the highly illegal, lethal substance. Victoria smiled, a twisted, terrifying expression of pure, unadulterated evil that mirrored the exact look she wore 16 years ago. She whispered to her daughter that they would utilize the exact same method that had worked so flawlessly on the mother of Elena. A heavy, lethal dose of concentrated liquid morphine. Victoria explained the dark, murderous plan with chilling, psychopathic precision. They would secretly lace a warm glass of milk with the deadly narcotic. They would bring it to the bedroom of Elena late tonight, operating under the deceptive guise of a pre-wedding peace offering to settle their family disputes. Once the naive girl drank the tainted milk, The drug would rapidly enter her bloodstream, making her entirely disoriented, weak, and completely incapable of fighting back. Then, Victoria and Chloe would personally drag her limp body to the high stone balcony of her bedroom and push her over the edge into the dark courtyard below. Victoria chuckled darkly, her eyes gleaming with wicked triumph. She confidently declared that the incompetent police force would hastily roll at a tragic pre-wedding suicide, completely driven by the immense, unbearable psychological pressure of marrying into the most powerful dynasty in New York. The grand-grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight, its heavy chimes echoing through the silent, oppressive halls of the Vance Manor. Inside her dimly lit bedroom, Elena stood perfectly still near the large bay window. She was fully dressed in a dark silk robe, completely awake and highly alert. Her sharp instincts, honed by years of survival in a hostile world, told her that desperate animals would always strike in the dead of night. She listened intently as soft, stealthy footsteps approached her heavy oak door. A gentle, deceptively sweet knock broke the silence. Elena unlocked the door and pulled it open, her face an impenetrable mask of mild curiosity. Victoria stood in the hallway, wearing a plush dressing gown and an incredibly fake, motherly smile. Beside her stood Chloe, nervously shifting her weight from foot to foot, her eyes darting everywhere except the face of her stepsister. In the hands of Victoria was an ornate silver tray, holding a single, steaming crystal glass of warm milk. Victoria spoke in a sickeningly sweet, hushed tone, claiming that she could not sleep. She spun a pathetic web of lies, stating that the upcoming engagement party had made her highly nostalgic and deeply remorseful for their past misunderstandings. She offered the warm milk as a profound gesture of peace, a motherly blessing before the grand celebration tomorrow. Elena stepped back, allowing the two vipers to enter her private sanctuary. She took the silver tray from the trembling hands of Victoria. As she brought the crystal glass closer to her face, pretending to appreciate the warm gesture, her highly trained medical senses immediately went to work. Beneath the rich, comforting scent of dairy and honey, her sharp olfactory receptors detected a faint, incredibly distinct, bitter chemical odor. It was the undeniable, lethal stench of concentrated liquid morphine. A freezing, murderous rage ignited deep within her chest, but her beautiful face remained completely serene. They were actually foolish enough to try the exact same murder weapon they had used 16 years ago. Elena offered a soft, grateful smile. She walked over to the small vanity table, turning her back to the two women for a fraction of a second. With blinding, lethal speed, she swapped the poisoned crystal glass with an identical glass of plain milk she had prepared earlier that evening, fully anticipating a late-night attempt on her life. She turned back around, holding the safe glass, and took a slow, deliberate sip. Victoria and Chloe watched her swallow the liquid, their eyes gleaming with wicked, triumphant anticipation. They waited eagerly for the heavy narcotic to take effect, expecting Elena to collapse into a disoriented, helpless heap on the floor. Instead, Elena walked toward the heavy oak door and casually turned the brass lock, sealing the three of them inside the soundproof bedroom. The sharp click of the lock echoed loudly, causing Chloe to flinch violently. Elena turned around, her polite smile vanishing completely, replaced by the terrifying, dominant aura of an apex predator. She walked back to the vanity, picked up the original poisoned glass of milk, and held it out toward Victoria. Her voice dropped to a chilling, lethal whisper. She commanded Victoria to drink the rest of the peace offering. The wicked triumph completely drained from the face of the stepmother. Victoria stumbled backward, her heavily contoured face turning a ghastly shade of pale. She stammered nervously, refusing the offer, claiming she was already quite full. Chloe began to panic, aggressively tugging at the sleeve of her mother, realizing that the situation had rapidly spiraled out of their control. Elena did not ask twice. In one smooth, lightning-fast motion, she retrieved the stolen 9mm Browning from the pocket of her silk robe. She aimed the heavy steel barrel directly at the forehead of Victoria. Chloe let out a piercing shriek of absolute terror, dropping to her knees and covering her head. Elena stepped forward, pressing the cold muzzle of the gun hard against the skull of the older woman. She ordered Victoria to open her mouth and drink the poisoned milk, or she would permanently decorate the expensive wallpaper with her brains. She explicitly stated that she recognized the bitter scent of the morphine. Faced with the terrifying barrel of the Mafia weapon, Victoria was completely paralyzed by fear. Her hands shook violently as Elena forced the crystal glass against her lips, tilting it upward. The lethal, bitter liquid spilled into the mouth of Victoria, forcing her to swallow a substantial amount. Elena tossed the empty glass aside, watching as it shattered into 100 pieces on the hardwood floor. Victoria collapsed onto the ground, clutching her throat, her eyes wide with unadulterated, primal terror. The psychological trap was set flawlessly. Victoria fully believed she had just ingested a massive, fatal dose of the narcotic. Her breathing became erratic, her heart pounding frantically against her ribs as she experienced a severe, induced panic attack that perfectly mimicked the onset of a drug overdose. She screamed in sheer agony, begging for an ambulance, completely convinced she was mere minutes away from a gruesome death. Elena stood over her, an immovable statue of cold vengeance. She casually pulled a small, unmarked syringe filled with a clear liquid from her pocket, holding it up to the dim light. She coldly announced that she possessed the absolute antidote, a chemical compound capable of neutralizing the morphine instantly. But the price for her salvation was the absolute, unvarnished truth. Victoria thrashed on the floor, weeping hysterically, her expensive facade completely destroyed. Elena demanded to know exactly what happened on the high stone balcony 16 years ago. She pressed the cold tip of her designer shoe against the chest of her stepmother, applying agonizing pressure, counting down from 5. Believing her life was rapidly fading away, Victoria broke completely. She screamed out her horrific confession, her voice echoing violently in the locked room. She wailed that she and Eleanor Sterling had injected the mother of Elena with the lethal drug. She confessed that they had dragged her disoriented body to the edge of the balcony. She explicitly screamed that they had pushed her over the railing together, murdering her in cold blood to seize the immense wealth of the Vance estate. Chloe sobbed uncontrollably in the corner, thoroughly horrified by the bloody confession of her own mother. Elena stared down at the pathetic, weeping murderers. Her thumb lightly brushed against the small, highly advanced audio recorder hidden deep within the pocket of her robe. The tiny red light blinked steadily, having captured every single frantic, damning word of the hysterical confession in crystal clear high definition. The trap had worked with devastating perfection. Victoria lay weeping on the floor, fully expecting the icy grip of death, entirely unaware that the milk she had consumed was completely harmless. Elena looked at the tiny syringe in her hand, which contained nothing but simple saline solution. She tossed it casually onto the floor next to the sobbing woman, a chilling smile gracing her beautiful features. The ultimate weapon was finally forged, and tomorrow, at the grand engagement banquet, she would unleash absolute hell upon the Sterling and Vance dynasties. The following evening, the magnificent Sterling castle was transformed into a dazzling spectacle of unimaginable wealth and prestige. Thousands of brilliant crystal lights illuminated the grand ballroom, casting a golden glow over the sea of elite billionaires, influential politicians, and prominent global media representatives. The engagement of a Sterling heir was the social event of the decade, and the atmosphere buzzed with intense anticipation. Standing near the towering floral archway at the front of the room, Eleanor wore an expression of smug, absolute victory. She casually sipped her vintage champagne, her eyes continuously darting toward the grand entrance. She fully expected her phone to ring at any moment with the delightful news that the rural beggar had tragically taken her own life in a fit of pre-wedding anxiety. Beside her, Asher was a complete, unmitigated disaster. The youngest heir sweated profusely inside his tailored tuxedo, his hands trembling so violently he could barely hold the velvet ring box. The horrific weight of his cowardly silence crushed his chest, making it difficult for him to breathe. Suddenly, the The heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom swung wide open. The majestic orchestra immediately began to play the grand entrance march, and the entire room fell into a breathless hush. Eleanor turned her head, fully prepared to act out her fake shock and devastation over the absence of the bride. Instead, her heart stopped completely in her chest. The crystal champagne flute slipped from her manicured fingers, shattering violently against the polished marble floor. Elena did not just arrive. She conquered. She did not wear the traditional, submissive white gown expected of a docile new bride. Instead, she was draped in a breathtaking, floor-length gown of deep, liquid crimson that clung to her perfect figure like a second skin. She looked like a supreme queen of blood and vengeance descending upon her fragile prey. Her dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, and her eyes burned with a cold, terrifying authority. As she walked down the aisle with slow, predatory grace, the flashing cameras of the media captured every single flawless angle. Standing in the shadowy VIP section, Julian swirled a glass of dark liquor. A dark, incredibly proud smirk played on his handsome features as he watched his fiercely independent girl command the entire room. He had already ordered his highly trained men to secure the exits and take absolute control of the audiovisual booth. Elena reached the grand altar. Beatrice Sterling smiled warmly, completely unaware of the catastrophic storm that was about to break. The matriarch nodded to Asher, silently commanding him to proceed. Asher took a shaky step forward. He opened the velvet box, revealing a massive, flawless diamond ring. His raspy voice broke as he tried to recite his vows, but before he could even utter a single complete sentence, Elena raised her hand. She did not take the ring. Instead, she smoothly took the microphone from the master of ceremonies. She turned to face the massive crowd of elites and reporters. Her voice echoed through the cavernous ballroom, cold and perfectly composed. She announced that before she could officially accept her place within the prestigious Sterling dynasty, a massive, unpaid debt of blood had to be settled in front of the entire world. Elena gave a subtle nod toward the control booth. The gigantic LED screens behind the altar, originally meant to display a romantic montage of the couple, suddenly flickered to life. Instead of a video, the screen displayed a stark, highly magnified waveform. Then the crisp, high-definition audio recording echoed violently through the state-of-the-art surround sound system. It was the hysterical, weeping voice of Victoria Vance. The recording captured her screaming in absolute, primal terror, confessing to the gruesome murder. The voice of Victoria wailed that she and Eleanor Sterling had injected the mother of Elena with the lethal drug. The voice shrieked that Eleanor had grabbed the legs while Victoria grabbed the shoulders, and together, they pushed the disoriented woman over the high stone balcony. The ballroom erupted into absolute, unprecedented chaos. Hundreds of guests gasped in sheer horror. The media representatives completely lost their minds, their cameras flashing like a violent strobe light storm as they documented the catastrophic downfall of the noble family. Eleanor shrieked like a banshee. Her face turned purple with manic fury as she lunged forward, desperately trying to snatch the microphone from the hand of Elena. She screamed that the recording was a complete fabrication, a malicious lie designed to ruin her flawless reputation. Elena casually sidestepped the frantic attack, allowing Eleanor to stumble clumsily in her expensive heels. Elena spoke into the microphone once again, her voice easily cutting through the deafening uproar. She stated that murder was merely the desperate solution to cover up a much deeper, more humiliating sin. The massive screens shifted. The audio waveform disappeared, replaced by high-resolution scans of deeply passionate, highly scandalous love letters. Elena read the dates aloud, explicitly proving that Eleanor had been carrying on a prolonged, illicit affair while her husband, the former head of the Sterling family, was dying in his hospital bed. The mother of Elena had discovered the letters, and for that single piece of knowledge, she had been brutally silenced. Before Eleanor could even attempt another pathetic denial, the blare of heavy police sirens pierced the night air outside the castle. The grand double doors were kicked open once again. Dozens of heavily armed detectives and uniformed police officers swarmed into the ballroom. They had been provided with the undeniable evidence hours in advance. Another group of officers dragged a disheveled, heavily handcuffed Victoria into the room, cementing the absolute reality of the situation. Two stern detectives marched directly up to the altar. They completely ignored the hysterical screaming and empty threats of Eleanor. They aggressively pulled her arms behind her back, locking heavy steel handcuffs around her wrists. Eleanor thrashed and wailed, her expensive gown tearing, her perfect hair unraveling into a chaotic mess. She desperately screamed the name of her son, begging Asher to use his immense power and wealth to save her from the inevitable nightmare of a federal prison cell. But Asher did not save her. The cowardly heir dropped to his knees right in the middle of the grand altar. The velvet ring box tumbled from his grasp, the priceless diamond bouncing away and rolling uselessly across the marble floor. Asher buried his face in his hands, weeping uncontrollably like a pathetic, broken child. His utter cowardice and absolute uselessness were completely exposed to the entire world, forever destroying his reputation and his standing within the ruthless elite society. Elena stood tall amidst the blinding flashes of the cameras and the deafening roar of the scandalized crowd. She looked down at the weeping, ruined man at her feet and the shrieking murderer being dragged away in chains. Her 16-year journey of agonizing patience had finally culminated in absolute, spectacular justice. The vengeance was complete, and she emerged entirely victorious. The deafening uproar continued to echo around the grand ballroom, but Elena stood in the center of the storm with absolute tranquility. She looked down at the pathetic, trembling form of Asher Sterling on the marble floor. Raising the microphone one last time, her voice cut through the chaos with freezing clarity. She declared that she would never tie her life to a coward who chose his own comfort over the bloody truth. With absolute finality, she officially canceled the engagement, shattering the final illusion of the Vance and Sterling alliance. Suddenly, the frantic crowd parted in dead silence. Julian Sterling emerged from the shadows. He wore a flawlessly tailored suit, his terrifying aura commanding immediate submission from every elite guest and media reporter present. He did not spare a single glance for his disgraced stepmother being dragged away by the police, nor did he look at his weeping younger brother. His dark, obsessive gaze was locked entirely on Elena. Julian walked up the steps of the grand altar. Right in the middle of the ruined engagement banquet, amidst the flashing cameras and the shattered remains of two powerful dynasties, the supreme boss of the underworld did the unthinkable. He dropped gracefully to one knee. From his pocket, he produced a velvet box containing a breathtaking, flawless black diamond ring, a true symbol of ultimate, undisputed power in his dark empire. He looked up into her eyes, his voice deep and vibrating with raw, undeniable possession. He told her that she had rejected him because her heart was entirely consumed by her quest for revenge. But now that her enemies were utterly destroyed and absolute justice was served, she had no reason to run away from him anymore. He declared that his vast empire, his immense power, and his very life belonged entirely to her. For the first time in 16 years, the impenetrable, icy armor surrounding the heart of Elena finally melted. She looked at the most dangerous man in the city, the only person who had matched her dark intensity and stood by her side. A genuine, radiant smile broke across her beautiful face. She extended her hand, allowing Julian to slide the heavy diamond onto her finger. He stood up, pulling her flush against his chest, and they walked out of the chaotic ballroom together. They left the ashes of their enemies behind, stepping into the night to roll their new, absolute empire side by side. What an incredibly thrilling and satisfying conclusion. This story leaves us with a profound life lesson and deep humanistic values. It reminds us that the truth can never be buried forever. Evil deeds and dark secrets will eventually be brought into the light, and justice, even if delayed for many years, will always strike with absolute precision. More importantly, this tale teaches us that true strength does not come from waiting for a hero to save you. True power comes from relying on your own intellect, maintaining a clear mind through the darkest times, and fighting fiercely for what is right. How did this intense story make you feel today? Can you relate the struggles and the incredible resilience of our strong female protagonist to any challenges or injustices in your own real life? Please leave a comment below. We truly want to read your thoughts and listen to the deep feelings from the bottom of your heart. If you enjoyed this dramatic tale, please remember to hit the subscribe button, like this video, and share it with your friends so you can listen to many more fascinating and emotional videos every single day. We sincerely wish everyone watching this video great health, a joyful life every single day, and eternal peace. Goodbye and see you in the next video.